You should get a dedicated computer and start mining Bitcoin. I can show you how to do it. And this is before they had these like supercomputers with like whole warehouses. But this dude's doing it back in 2009. Nobody allowed him access to that thing that God was literally just calling him to step into. Yeah. Part of me wanted to be very pissed off at her. Why would you give that money away? There's only a finite amount. I'm actually going to be wrong or told that I'm dumb or that I'm not as good, or my standardized test scores say that, oh, I scored lower than this percentage of my classmates. I could literally flip the script. You're just making it too hard for these kids. If you look at the things that are just off or like keeping you stuck, then that allows you to have the breakthrough. But most people want to shy away from the thing that's painful.
Yeah.
What is up, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Profitable Chiro Network. So excited to bring you these episodes every single week. My beautiful wife, Heather, is here with us today.
Hello.
And Heather, would you mind sharing what we're going to talk about just on like a really basic level, and then we'll jump into it?
The secrets of the educational system.
Of the educational system. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the school system, specifically how the school system is keeping you stuck. This will share some of my experience as a teacher, some of my experience before I was a teacher. And what if I told you that every single one of us had the exact same potential to be successful, but there is a very specific, almost sinister thing that you may not know about that is keeping you and maybe your family members and maybe your kiddos stuck. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Cool.
Most people struggle not because there's something wrong with them, not because we're made better, one person's made better than the other person, but it comes down to a set of mindsets, a set of skill sets, and a set of beliefs, and that's what I really want to dive into on this episode. Mm-hmm. So most people, I think, get stuck where they feel like, oh, that person's just better than me, or that person has it, you know, they were born into more money than I was, or they're just naturally more gifted in XYZ area.
Right.
But the reality is I would argue that none of that's true. Like, yes, we have our own gifts, but there's a specific thing that has to do with schooling, which we'll talk about on this episode, that keeps people stuck. And that's my challenge to you. So if you are looking for more inside of your life, if you're looking to upgrade your identity, if you're looking to change your path, if you're looking to grow your business or become a better, husband or wife or whatever it is that you're looking for, this episode is going to be the place for you to start to crush some limiting beliefs and realize that a lot of the things you've been trained into that you may not even know about are actually what's keeping you stuck.
Love it.
You ready to dive in?
Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay. So you guys have heard me talk about this story before. You've heard me talk about this story a lot before, but here's the situation. So when I was a assistant manager I wasn't even an assistant manager. I was actually technically, we'll get the details right, I was the third key holder at the oil change shop. And so this is when I was in high school. So
you were in training to be the assistant manager.
So I had a key, but I thought I was like the man because I had a key to get in and out of the oil change shop. So check this out. I'm going to share a little like dirty secret of my background. I don't even know if you know some of these.
Ooh.
I think you might though. So when I was in freshman in high school, I got my first job. I was barely 14 at the time, and I was waxing buses. Mm-hmm. So the school district that my mom worked in, I got a job waxing the buses for the school district. And what's so interesting about it is I was really good at it, and I made like good money. So, and I had no responsibilities. Like my car insurance was cheap, my gas was cheap, and I basically just saved all of my money. But in the process, because, I wasn't the best high school student ever, which would probably be putting it lightly, I was into a lot of negative, dark stuff. So my situation looks like this, just to give you a little backstory before I tell you why I'm talking about becoming an assistant manager at the oil change shop. So I had a friend who worked at the oil change shop that I eventually ended up working for. Mm-hmm. And he somehow knew someone who was getting like sample packs, cartons of cigarettes for basically free. So he was getting trash bags full of these sample cartons of cigarettes. And what I would do is I would buy these cartons of cigarettes from this person. This is like black market stuff that we're talking about. And remember, I'm 14 years old. I'm in high school. And so I would go to the school district that I worked in where I was waxing buses, and all day long, in addition to waxing the buses, I would sell cartons of cigarettes. And I made a whole bunch of extra money doing it until word got around. So there was like, what happened is it started with just the people who were at the bus garage, right? Where I was waxing the buses. So it started with them, but then the word got out.
Including adults that you were selling to.
It was all adults. There were no minors. Like maybe one of my friends who I was like, yeah, you could just have like a free pack or whatever. But this is all adults, right? So I'm 14 years old, and the adults are thinking like, oh, we're going to go buy cigarettes from this 14-year-old because it's way cheaper. I mean, I was selling them for like half the price that you could buy a carton of cigarettes at a gas station. So this is so crazy. I'm even sharing this. There's a point. I promise there's a point. So I'm selling these cartons of cigarettes, and I eventually, like, other people from other departments in the school are coming. So like this is a big school district, right? And I'm getting people coming from all over that are just literally showing up, have nothing to do with the bus garage. Like janitors from the high school, janitors from the middle school, teachers are showing up.
Whoa.
And they're like, hey, I heard you have like cigarettes to sell. And I would go get in this big trash bag in the back of my car or in the back of my truck bed. And I would give them like 20 packs of cigarettes and I would sell them. And I made like a beautiful amount of money doing it, which is ridiculous. So then my boss, she gets wind of this, and it's like obviously I'm a 14-year-old, so I shouldn't have cigarettes in the first place.
Yeah.
So I get in trouble and I get fired from that job. But what's so interesting is like I still think about it to this day. I'm like, it's so crazy. Like, yeah, I wasn't necessarily in the right, but also like the adults were encouraging it because they were saving money.
Well, yeah.
So are we like good so far?
Yeah. Dylan Daniel.
So this is Daniel and at 14 years old. So then at like 16, 17 years old, I basically got a job at Target and I worked in the food court / the Pizza Hut / Taco Bell in the beginning stretch. And then I would go back and forth. So they would put me on the sales floor and then they would bring me back in to the food court. And one day I had a friend who also worked in the food court, and he just grabbed like whatever he grabbed for breakfast that day. And I get called in later in the afternoon after he had gotten called in, and I'm like, he just never came back. And I was like, what happened to him? I know he didn't go home early. He was doing great, and he had another like 3 hours to work like I did. We were on the same shift. So they call me in, and they're like, hey, what did your friend have for breakfast this morning? And I was like, I don't really know. And they're like, well, we have him on camera getting like a cinnamon roll and this thing and this thing. And basically, long story short, because I didn't stop him from like taking the food and just eating it without paying for it, I got fired for stealing at Target as well.
Oh.
So I share this with you because my track record of jobs when I was younger, even though I made a lot of money, not really, really great. So I get fired from Target, and then this is like, this is just crazy. I couldn't make this up, right? So then we get to, I become assistant manager, or I start working at the oil change shop,
right,
where I would eventually become the third key holder. What's crazy about that job is that my boss was the one who was initially selling me the cigarettes way back when I was buying them when I was like 14, 15, 16 in the summers and selling them at the bus garage.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so same boss, right? So there's like this whole full circle moment that happens. And the question is probably like, well, why the heck are you sharing it with me? Well, one is because I think that if we look at the situation, right, is I was a person who, like, I never really wanted to follow the rules, right? And I kind of just stayed sort of in my own lane. And I didn't care about school. Not that I was a bad student necessarily, but I really didn't. I could have cared less about school.
You weren't motivated
like,
at all.
I wanted to work. I wanted to make money. And I thought that like my ticket to quote unquote success was going to be working at the oil change shop, becoming third key holder, which I was, and then getting eventually the promotion to assistant manager, where I would have had, well, as a third key holder, I had 401k, but I would have just had more. I would have had like health insurance and some of the stuff. And I thought I was going to be set. You're laughing. What's up?
You just keep saying the third key holder like it's so important.
I am proud of the third key. And there's like, I know we're laughing.
How many times have you dropped to that?
I know we're laughing, but like the reality is that's what I thought success looked like.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of the point of the episode is that my situation was success to me was being able to have a 401k and have insurance, like health insurance and dental.
Right.
And then I don't know what I was going to be making. I think it was like $12 an hour. And again, this is in Indiana, so like a little different if you're listening and you're on the West Coast in California now. And this is in what, 2003, 2004, 2005. Right. So like times are a little bit different. 20 years ago, actually. That's wild to think about.
It's really wild. So
anyway, long story short, my dad is like, you have to go to college. Like, you're not going to be the assistant manager at the oil change shop. And I was like, Dad, dude, this is my way out. Like, this is it. I'm like,
You're set.
I'll be able to buy a house. I'll be able to have a car. I already have a car. Like everything will be great. I'll be set. And he lovingly told me, yeah, you're kind of dumb. That's not going to work.
He just wanted something more for you than what he had.
Exactly. So what happened was I applied to one school and I decided to I had no choice but to go because he thought I was stupid. And he's like, you have to go to college. And I was hoping that I wouldn't get accepted. Because if I didn't, then I could say, well, Dad, I tried. But God had another plan where I ended up getting accepted, and then I get into undergrad. And when I got into undergrad, it's kind of like everything changed for me.
Right.
For a short spell. And so the struggle was like, in that process, I kind of dealt with like quite a bit of addiction. There was just a lot of darkness in my life.
In high school.
Yeah, in high school.
And in college.
And in college. And when I got to college, first semester, we were asked to write a research paper. But in high school, if you remember high school, I don't know how your high school was compared to mine or anybody listening, but my high school, you didn't get to choose what you did your research paper on. It was like, you're going to read this book and you're going to write this paper about this thing. And it was very follow the rules.
Yeah, no like critical thinking involved.
Which is part of why I feel like I had that situation and kind of the struggle of like the addiction and the like, getting fired from 2 jobs. Not because I was a bad person, but because I felt confined by like a system that wasn't allow me to express who I truly was.
Right.
But I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't have strategies for it. So in college, it literally looked like this. This is first semester. It was write a research paper. Here's 100 topics. Go figure it out. And then once you chose a topic, then the instructor would be like, here's a couple pieces of research just to help you.
To guide you along, to move
to like
forward.
get you interested so you kind of know where to go or who to look up. And then you can, like, if you know anything about research, you look at the end and there are other people who are cited. And then that kind of takes you down a rabbit hole where you can get some momentum.
Yes.
So I saw 2 words on a page of this list of like 100 topics. One was hidden curriculum. So the 2 words hidden curriculum, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what it meant. I barely knew what curriculum meant, but I knew what hidden was. And there's something about the secret in it. I was super inspired. So I decided, this is what I'm going to do my research paper on. And pretty quickly, I start reading some of these authors, and I'll share this research with you guys here in a minute because I think it's important to dive into like, what does the hidden curriculum say? And then what's the point of this kind of drawn out story is that the hidden curriculum basically states that there's curriculum in schools and other places too, but primarily schools that is being taught that regardless of if you're aware of it or not, it's teaching something that could be potentially keeping you stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, just elaborate more if you can.
Yeah. So
giving examples and stuff.
So an example of that would be like, if I would use the example of Coco, right? So let's say, I'll give you a good example. This actually happened this morning. So Coco gave $20. We gave Coco $20 to go to the movies with her friend for her friend's birthday. And Coco gave the $20. She was supposed to buy a ticket and she offered to buy the ticket. And then obviously like the parents are so sweet and amazing that they're like, no, you don't have to pay for your ticket. But later one of her friends is like, hey, Coco, you have money. And Coco was like, yeah, you can have it. Here's the $20. So she gave her money away.
Yeah.
And part of me wanted to be very pissed off at her and be like, why would you give that money away? Like, there's only so much money. There's only a finite amount of money.
Sure.
But I didn't, because I realized that thought process of if I would have yelled at her in that moment, what am I implying? I never said it, but it would have been, don't be generous.
Or like the frugal mindset, hoard it.
You should hoard. You should penny pinch.
Never
That's
give.
yours, not theirs.
Yes.
And really, it's all God's anyway.
Right.
So I had this moment, like literally sitting there this morning, where I'm like, I can't say those things to her, even though I want to. That's a hidden curriculum.
That's also how like we were raised in that mindset.
Yeah, my dad told me my entire life growing up, like I only have $3.
Yeah, that is the running joke in your family.
Yeah. So I had these beliefs about money that I felt compelled to kind of yell at Coco, but I couldn't do it because I realized I caught myself. I had this awareness, and that's kind of the breakthrough, right? So is that if you have an awareness of what's happening, then you can change it.
Yeah.
And so this gets back to what I said in the beginning. A lot of people get stuck because they aren't even aware that something like a hidden curriculum exists.
Yeah.
And the hidden curriculum is something like I could have been teaching that Coco that generosity is not a good thing. And we are not generous, that we hoard our money. But instead it was like, okay, I want to know why you gave her the money. And she was like, well, because she wanted it. And we didn't push too much into it because I just kind of had this pause of like, I can't teach my daughter to not be generous.
Sure.
I got to teach her to be responsible.
Right.
But to not be generous would be a detriment to what we know successful people do.
Right.
And the part of the brain that being generous comes from in the first place. So I did not teach her that with my words, but I would have never outright said, because I would never tell anybody like, hey, you shouldn't be generous. I try to be as generous as we can with like everyone.
Right.
So hidden curriculum says that the skills that you learn specifically in school are training you to be at a certain level in terms of income, in terms of your socioeconomic status, in terms of the job that you want to get. And so, I'll dive into the research, but what I found is that as I started examining my own life, I realized that the only reason I had an aspiration to just be the assistant manager, to not want to go to college, is because I was trained in school to follow the footsteps of you don't think creatively. Like I said, I never got to choose what I did a research paper on. I never got to choose what book I was allowed to read. Someone told me what to read, and then I read it, and I did what they told me to do with it. And there was an exact process. You do this first, and then you do this next.
Yeah.
And you don't deviate from the process.
Well, even in like test taking, wouldn't you say like multiple choice questions is like a huge impact in that?
There's only one right answer.
Right. Only a select few.
Of only a select few. Yep. And you need to think about them in this way.
Right.
And if you don't do well on it, then you're not smart.
Right.
You're dumb.
Right.
The problem with that is that it's not empowering. And the problem with that is I would go even further to say that it's not true.
Well, it also, like, you mentioned this earlier in the episode where it's like it takes you away from who your true identity is as well, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Because if we were all called for more, if you were called for more, if I was called for more, but then I learn that, and if I do certain things, I'm actually going to get in trouble. If I think a certain way, I'm actually going to be wrong or told that I'm dumb or that I'm not as good, or my standardized test scores say that, oh, I scored lower than this percentage of my classmates, then what we're doing is putting people into a box of like, no, you just fall in line and you follow the rules and that's it.
Right.
But most people don't even know that that's a thing, which is why I wanted to be a teacher in the first place, because it made me passionate and light up and realize that if we could bring people awareness, if I could bring students awareness, or I was aware of what I was actually implying inside of what I was teaching, then I could just I could literally flip the script, so to speak. So I started teaching my students when I got into the classroom, and I'm like, there is no right answer. And it frustrated, like all these kids would literally go from kindergarten to 9th grade.
Right.
And they're like, wait a second.
There's only one
Mr.
right
Kimball,
answer.
You're not going to tell us what the right answer is? No, because there's no right answer. You're not going to tell us how to do the research paper? No, because there's more than one way to do a research paper.
Yeah.
You got to show us how to do the research. Like we learned in freshman year that we have to do things a very specific way. And I'm like, there are some places where that's true, but there are a lot of places where it's not true.
Well, can you tell a story about some of your honors kids and the families and how they would like reach out to you in regards to like their grades at that time?
For sure. So one of the kiddos, this is what's so crazy is like, especially with the honors families, and not all of them, but some were on board and they're like, appreciate it. Cause they're like, this is the first time my kids ever had a C.
Right.
And they were kind of stoked on it because they're like, something you're doing is different, but my kid's like working harder and they're thinking differently and they're frustrated and they're like, oh, there's a challenge.
Right.
I can think of one girl in particular. Her name is Maddie. You've probably heard me talk about her before.
That's why I wanted you to bring this up.
Yeah, I also coach her in volleyball, but mom would call, weekly. I was getting like
regularly,
phone call.
Yeah.
Hey, we need to have another chat. Maddie has a C in your class. And she was always a straight A student before, like literally her entire life. So straight A's, honor roll, and she had a C. And parents could not wrap their head around the fact that like, if you can't think critically in my classroom, you will not do well. And they're like, why that you're just making it too hard for these kids. And they were frustrated. And I was frustrated because I had to have the conversation with the parents every week. But the reality is that she was being trained to literally just think a certain way.
Well, they were brought up in the same system.
And most people are.
Yeah.
But most people aren't willing to. So the parents didn't even want to look. They just wanted to look at a grade that said this is the definition of success, which brings up the whole thing of like there's all these things within the school system that say definition of success is if you get an A.
Right.
If you got straight A's. And I think there's way more to it to say what actually defines success. And I know some students who literally barely graduated high school. I can think of one student in particular, but this dude was so far ahead of his time. Like he was literally telling me, he's like, Mr. Kimbley, you should get a dedicated computer and start mining Bitcoin. This is in like 2009. And he's like, I can show you how to do it. And this is before they had these like supercomputers with like whole warehouses that are like trying to mine. Can you even still mine Bitcoins, Wes? Is that a thing? Yeah. But this dude's doing it back in 2009, 2010. So far ahead of his time. But literally every single teacher's like, he's dumb. He's never going to amount to anything. And I'm like, I don't know where he's at now, but I just remember that. And I look back on it, I'm like, that kid is freaking brilliant. But nobody allowed him access to that thing that God was literally just calling him to step into.
Yes.
And that's what I think is so interesting is like, if we're afraid to look at the reality, and this is the struggle and it's also the solution. Most people are afraid to look. I was afraid to look. I didn't even know to look. But then as a teacher, I'm like, everybody has to look, because if you look at the things that are like just off or like keeping you stuck, then that allows you to have the breakthrough. But most people want to shy away from the thing that's painful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Taking the easy route in all capacities versus the hard easy.
Yeah. And school shies us away from that. Like the kiddo I was just sharing. So like Maddie, her parents, she had a C, but her parents expected her to have an A. And they couldn't even acknowledge the fact that like it's actually good that she has a C, because it's calling her to rise to a different level of thought process and a different skill set that would actually prepare her for a world that requires critical thinking.
Well, yeah. How many people out in the world outside of school are choosing A, B, C, or D?
Most people.
No, I mean like in your normal everyday business.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like a test perspective.
Yeah. Like.
Yeah, no one.
Exactly.
Like there are jobs where it's just like you follow the direction.
Sure.
But what I know is most people who are in those jobs don't particularly love them in the first place. They just felt like, oh, well, this is all I'll ever amount to, because that's what they've been told. Or even worse, they didn't even know that they've been trained into a system to get a job at that level.
Yeah.
That's just keeping them stuck, and they actually have the potential for more.
Which also, being trained in that system doesn't allow you to find what your true purpose is.
Yeah.
So they just stay stuck with being unhappy versus getting outside their comfort zone and finding what they're really passionate and excited about.
100%. So, and this is my journey, right? This is why I shared it. So the struggle is like, I wanted to be the assistant manager because I thought that was going to set me free. And I didn't want to go to college. But I realized it was only because I was trained in a certain set of skills that I didn't believe I was good enough to go to college.
Yeah.
But this is what's wild is my grandma, Nanny, used to tell me all the time when I was a kid, she was like, all you talked about was becoming a doctor. She's like, you said you wanted to go to IU and you wanted to become a doctor. And it's like, I thought that she was crazy when I got to college. I'm like, no, I'm just going to be a teacher. I'm not going to become a doctor. And then later... So I learned about the hidden curriculum and I started learning these things and I realized like, oh, there's more. And literally the thing that I thought I wanted to do, because I thought that's where I would fit in, was a place that brought me to like the most addiction, the most darkness, the most brokenness.
Yeah.
And until I forced myself to like step out of that situation, that's when I realized like, oh, I think I was actually onto something when I was a little kid and I told my grandma that I wanted to become a doctor. Like something just in me, God put it there. And it's the same thing is true. Like when we talk about, I don't know why I always thought that my body knew how to heal itself. No matter how many drugs I did, I would still tell my friends, like, I don't need Tylenol to take a headache. It doesn't make sense, but it was just in me as a part of my identity. And now I get to fully step into it as a doctor. And the coolest part is I get to empower other people to do it. And everybody, I don't care who it is, everybody has the same potential to do that thing that's going to impact people and impact their lives and like serve people at the highest level and step into, I think, what God has called us all to be, which is more.
And it doesn't matter like what school system you go to based off of your location or the school system that you choose. It doesn't matter.
No, as long as you're aware. So that's what's cool. So what I want to do now is we'll kind of shift and transition. So that was my story, right? So ended up obviously teaching and then quit teaching, became chiro, moved across the country, did a bunch of stuff that people never thought we couldn't do and thought we would fail at, probably including our own parents in some ways, which is all good because it was scary and it was a lot and it's like, it's a risk. But what I want to do now is I want to go into some of that research that I was learning about and kind of highlight like what it says about the school that people go to. And again, the encouragement that like, even if someone is trained that you have to be a doctor, lawyer, surgeon, there might be something more for them. They're just being trained
outside
in a
of that
hidden curriculum. And that's what's so cool about the hidden curriculum is like, unless we're aware of it, we can't break it.
Right.
And it's so crucial. So here's what the research says. So couple people, I won't get into all of them because there are a lot of them, but the first one is Jean Anion. You've probably heard me talk about her before. So Jean Anion says that there is this thing called a hidden curriculum. Her research was, I believe, in the 90s. And there are 4 different types of schools. So there's like a low income school, there's a middle class school, there's an upper middle class school, and then what she calls like the executive elite school. And so what she found when she would go into these schools, she's just researching to see like what are the teachers teaching. And
like the type of curriculum.
And so what she found is that in the low income school, there's one right way to do things. So math, for instance, they would do worksheets. There's only one right way to do things. And then if it was outside of those exact set of processes.
So like the steps of multiplication, that is. Okay.
Or division.
Yeah,
but it's like there's only one right way.
Okay.
And if you deviate from that right way at all, you are incorrect. It doesn't matter if you
even
got
if
to
you
the
get
right
to the
answer.
right answer.
It doesn't matter because you need to follow a specific set of steps.
Yeah.
You could also take it and apply it to like when the school bells ring and some of those things because like I worked in factories. I was an intern at Rolls-Royce with my dad.
Right.
And one of the things I would notice is like the bell would ring for lunchtime and everybody would go to lunch.
Stop your machine and walk to the cafeteria.
Go to eat lunch. Yep. And then you come back. So like all of these little things she pointed out are like they're literally training kids to follow a pattern or fall in line. And a lot of it isn't conducive to, none of it is conducive to critical thinking. So if you think about how likely is it that someone who's only been told their entire life that they would become a doctor, if all they've ever told is that unless you do it this way, you're wrong, those kids, and her argument is this, is that those kids are getting prepped for jobs at that same socioeconomic status.
So can you give us an example of like this type of school?
I don't want to call out a specific school.
No, I'm not asking like say this specific school name, like generalize. This is like an area or population that.
Yeah. So low socioeconomic status. So what her argument is that the low income schools. So if parents don't make a lot of money, think of like a super urban inner city school district would be one example. It could also be very, very rural, like a farm community where there's not a lot of money either.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like an inner city school. But her argument is that if the parents don't make a lot of money, then the school is teaching a specific set of skills that are going to prepare the kids in a workforce where they're not going to make a lot of money.
So what kind of school systems do you think that we went to?
Well, looking at mine, I would say like the lower or the middle. So the middle class
that's
school
what I was thinking too.
Is the same where it's like there might be some deviance on how you got to, but there's still only one right answer and you need to follow a specific set of steps. There's not a lot of creativity. So just very, very different. And it may not be a worksheet. It may be like problems on the board or something like that.
Yeah. I know specifically, like I would feel like I was in the lower to middle, like right in between that, because I had 1 or 2 teachers that allowed the option of like critically thinking, but then all the rest of them, it was very much in line with what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remind people, like, this isn't a bash on teachers.
I wasn't implying
No,
that.
I know,
Oh, okay.
I know you weren't. I just thought of that, and it's like, it's not a bash on teachers. It's actually a bash on the way the system is set up because there's standardized testing.
Right.
And that is weighed more heavily in a lot of these lower socioeconomic status schools because the only way that they get funding is if their kids do well on these tests. And if the kids do well on the test, then that's how they keep their funding.
Right. There's a lot of pressure on it. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a really close friend that teaches fourth grade that she literally, the month of April is standardized testing month in preparation for that. And it's one of the most stressful months of the year because she gets critiqued heavily on that.
And so there's just so many challenges with it, right? So then if we go on, so then like the upper level schools, so the 2 top tier schools, there's like the upper middle and then the academic elite or the executive elite. So the 2 difference in those is like one is teaching kind of critical thinking. So they may be like, there's multiple different ways to get to the answer. You have to figure out how to get the answer on your own, but you just have to show your work in the process. And it doesn't matter how you get there. There's not a set steps that you have to follow. And then in the last, like the...
Well, would you consider that more of like a private school setting?
Yeah, these would be... So again, like anywhere where there's a private school. So when we grew up in Indianapolis, there was a school that I think it costs $500,000 from kindergarten through high school is what like the total tuition would cost. Well, if you think about like $500,000, that's a lot of money over the course of a schooling career.
Right.
My family couldn't even come close to affording that.
Oh, no.
And so then you look at like, okay, well, what jobs does someone who can afford to pay $500K for schooling from kindergarten through 12th grade, they're probably not going to be the person who's like the assistant manager at the oil change shop.
Working in the factories.
They're like in a factory, or they're a janitor, or they're like some lower income job. And not that that's bad. It's just different. And the point is that if we teach people a set of skills that they can get themselves out of, then it's easier to climb out of it. But if you're unaware, like I was, and I thought that my only role was going to be the assistant manager, then like it's because there was a lack of belief system, but it came from the hidden curriculum. It came from what I was being taught and how the world works.
Sure.
And no one was sitting down and saying like, Daniel, this is how the world works. It's like there's only one right way. But that was implied, is that if you don't fall in line, then you're wrong and you're a problem and you're trouble and you'll go here and whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So
then the elite schools.
These would be like the full-on private schools, and they're teaching just straight critical thinking, right? So it would be they're doing a project and they're interacting with other people, or it might not even be division where you're doing division off the board or on a worksheet, but it's like you're going to create some product or some, yard architecture thing, but in the process you have to figure out the division to do these dimensions. And so they're applying these things to real life scenarios, which requires critical thinking, which requires creativity, which requires collaboration with other people,
life skills,
exactly, success skills, which the other things don't. And so that was her argument, is that there's a hidden curriculum that's being taught, and it's very clear when I go and observe these schools, different skills are being taught to different socioeconomic statuses, regardless of whether the school is actually aware of it or not.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so that's why I was so called to become a teacher, because I realized if this was the case with me, I could see it in my own life.
Right.
That was the struggle. The solution was like, we got to look and become aware. So why don't I just teach all my kids to become aware that, hey, there is this thing and you should have to critically think, and maybe a C is not such a bad thing because you've never actually been challenged to think on your own before. And that's where we get into like this higher level. This is how we help people succeed.
Yeah.
This is how we help people find their identity. This is how we help people find their passion and their purpose in life and what their calling is. But it took literally an awareness of one instructor, first semester, college year, to say, you can do a research paper on whatever you want. Here's 100 different topics. I'll help you along the way, but you have to choose and figure it out on your own.
Would you say that colleges allow for more of the critical thinking in general because it is more specific to like an area that somebody wants to learn about?
I think that it can. I also think there's a hidden curriculum in college as well. And it could be anywhere. This is the thing, is like, this is why awareness is so key. Because if we're not aware of what we're implicitly teaching, then we're teaching things that could be wrong. And I go back to the example that I used with Coco. If I'm implicitly teaching her, I never said the words, but if I implicitly teach her that we don't give our friends money, what am I telling her? To not be generous.
Right.
And over time, then she grows up in a world where she's thinking like, I don't ever give anybody money ever.
Stingy.
And then like, how does she approach the church? But what's the Bible say? That we should tithe, right? So like, there's all these things that I'm teaching her different than what I'm actually doing. That would be a hidden curriculum for her. So it doesn't have to just be in the school setting.
It's in the family.
It could be in the family
environment
as parents. And like I said, the only key is awareness. Because when you know it exists and you want to take responsibility for, if Coco showed up a certain way where she was doing something, like I hear some parents where they're like, I don't know what's wrong with my kid, or I don't know why they're doing that. But usually I can watch the interaction that the parent has with those kids or with other people. And I'm like, that's exactly why they're doing it, because they're just modeling what you show them.
Yes.
And so and I'm not saying we're perfect by any means.
Oh yeah. You say it all the time that Coco responds certain ways because she's doing exactly what I did.
Yeah. Or what I do too. She's the exact same. She's like a little carbon copy, but that's how everyone is like what we're implicitly taught.
Right.
Right. It's what's, like Joshua says it this way. He says it's what's caught, not taught. And I think that's powerful. That's the hidden curriculum. What's caught, no one ever truly teaches it, but it's caught, not taught. Oh, I see them interact this way. Oh, I see this thing. I see this person treated this way. I see that when something goes wrong, I get mad and like frustrated and slam stuff. It's like, that's caught, not taught.
So you'll be able to show us or teach us a little bit more about how to become more aware of this before the end of the episode.
Yeah, 100%. I think the first step though, literally is just realizing that like what you were probably taught is a lie, and start looking at, and we'll get into that. But we'll break down the lie here in a second. But yes, 100%.
Cool.
So next is another researcher named Claude Steele. So Claude Steele, I've talked about this one before, but I think it's so interesting. So he talked about how what they would do is they would have kids take a test, and he found that when they would staple the kid's picture to the test, they would perform more poorly.
Yes.
And the question was why. So his thing about hidden curriculum was that if a student knows that they're being graded and they can be seen, if they're a student of color, so like African-American students is primarily what he researched, they perform more poorly. And the reason being is because there's a stereotype, so he calls it stereotype threat. And if someone feels that they're going to be perceived in a certain way, that they may perform more poorly because they're trying harder than they actually need to.
Well, that creates a stress response in their system, so it's automatically going to block the frontal
but who
cortex.
created the stress response?
They create it themselves because of the environment.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's so important to understand is like if we're teaching kids to create these stress responses within themselves, we're keeping them stuck. And so he even found that what'll happen eventually with stereotype threat is like kids will get to the point where they say it's useless to even try because I know what they're going to say about me. So then they become a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, I'm not even going to try because I already know what they're going to say about me, and they're going to think that I'm dumb anyway.
That's sad.
Yeah. And how many times do we see people do this all the time?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I've been told I'm no good my whole life, so I must be no good. So like, since everybody already thinks I'm no good, I'm just going to actually like go commit crimes and steal and do drugs and do whatever because no one ever has looked at them as like a person who actually has a purpose here on this earth.
And can create value.
And that's the hidden curriculum. No one ever said it outwardly, but the way that they've been treated their whole life, that's just what they believe about themselves. And so again, it's what's caught, not taught. And the coolest part, well, it's unfortunate, but it's cool, is that it prevents people from expressing their full potential. And this is what I'm passionate about, like seeing every person thrive, because every person has it within them already. I don't care where they come from, how they were born, what their skin color is, what their parents did when the babe was in utero. Like, we've seen people thrive when we get them back in their right minds through the chiropractic care that we provide, through empowering people to just realize that there is a potential within you that God gave you that literally can't be taken away or denied.
Yeah.
Can't be taken away or denied.
That's good.
How are we doing so far?
Good.
So then last one, there's a guy named Philip Jackson. So this is in 1968, and he wrote this research called Life in Classrooms. And what he basically realized is like, what he boiled it down to this. He was the first one to come up with the concept, but he said there's three things. So kids are taught waiting, they're taught obedience, and they're taught competition.
None of those sound very like waiting. Patience is a good thing, but
Yeah, well, they're taught patience is a good thing, but they're not taught to go after things. They're taught to sit and wait. You wait until the bell rings to leave your seat. You wait until it's time to go to the bathroom at 10:30.
you're only allowed to go at this specific time.
You're only allowed to do it at this time. So then people are like, I didn't know I was allowed to do that. And it's like, why would you not think you were allowed to do that? I didn't know I was allowed to do that pay structure. I didn't know I was allowed to create that contract for that person.
I've been caught in that before.
Yeah, I have too.
For sure.
Jake called me on this the other day. He's like, dude, you literally do everything different than everybody else in the chiropractic space. He's like, why would you not do this thing different too? He's like, it literally makes no sense. Try it. You're the only person trying stuff.
Can you share an example of how you've been caught in it?
In regards to like what I know for sure I didn't know I was allowed to do. Oh, I can't think of a specific time right now, but I know for sure that there have been instances. I'm sure there's been things with like raising cocoa.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of places. Like, think about, I'm trying to think of a good example, but, okay, I'll give you an example. So they use this one in schools a lot as like a little icebreaker, but they have kids. I think we probably did this when I was teaching too, but we would ask kids to do a thing where it's like, hey, you have to come up with XYZ in a certain amount of time. And then like the kids would all sit there and like work on their own silently. And it's like, did anybody do it in a certain amount of time? And it's like, no, we couldn't. It's impossible. Like, we would need help of other people. And it's like, what were your instructions to do this thing in a certain amount of time?
Didn't say you had to do it by yourself.
And then the
silence.
kids are like, yeah. So they're like, we're programmed sometimes to believe that like, oh, I thought I was supposed to do this in silence based on, so like sometimes it's just reading between the lines of the directions.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it doesn't say that I can't do it. It doesn't say that we can't practice this way.
I just thought of an example, and it falls with Danielle because I know specifically I taught her exactly step by step on how to do things when she was first hired. And she refused to do them the way I taught her to do them in the step-by-step way. But I was the one that was introducing that limiting, like the obedience kind of factor. And she was like, well, I'm not doing it this way. I'm good. But she still came to the same conclusion and the same, like,
Yeah.
It was just her process of doing it.
So this is what's cool though, is like, how do you become a good leader?
Yeah.
Like, you become a good leader by
that.
allowing autonomy.
Yes, yeah.
So like, here's the framework on how to do it.
Yeah.
This is what's so crazy. So I was just on a call with Dan, right? And he broke down his like system for something, and I'd watched the other recording of it, and it was, some of the stuff was the same, but it was completely different. Like, the framework of it was the same, but some of it was, and I was struggling because I'm like, dude, I already wrote this down one way. Is this wrong?
Yeah.
But if he recorded it 3 different times, it would be recorded different. It would be different all 3 times the way he's teaching it, which allows for autonomy. But that's what creates a good leader, is someone who can allow somebody to be autonomous. But if we're not aware
Yeah.
that we're like, no, it can only be done this way, and we're frustrated by it,
Yeah.
then like there's all these places. But again, it starts with awareness. That's the biggest piece of it. So waiting, competition, remember what we talked about on another episode, comparison actually triggers a stress response and makes us worse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So there's a level, and I know other people out there disagree and like, oh, men need competition and blah, 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 blah. But if we look at it, like, I'm not saying competition's bad, but I think in some places when we're comparing ourselves to one another, it actually sets us up for less success
Sure.
than if we were in what would be the opposite of competition, collaboration, right? Okay, so let's get down into the framework. So you ask me the question of, okay, how do you recognize it, right?
Right.
The first place that I start with everybody, this is an identity conversation is what it comes down to. So who you view yourself as could be, I would just have you consider that it might be who someone else has trained you to view yourself as, and it's not actually who you truly are.
Meaning like parent, teacher, boss,
society,
yeah.
neighborhood you grew up in, whatever. All kinds of places. So the first thing is recognizing the lie. So this is like my identity framework, right? So when we're talking about kingdom identity. So the first thing that you must do is recognize the lie that you have been told your entire life, that you've been that someone has tried to convince you to believe to be true that is keeping you stuck. So for me, it was, I'm not smart enough to go to college. I got fired from 2 jobs. I'm worthless. Being assistant manager will set me free. Just doing what I saw other people do around me will set me free. If I just fall in line, right? But clearly I didn't want to fall in line because you saw, like, I just did stuff different. I always have been. I've been like the black sheep in the family, not in a bad way, right? But I just always want to do stuff different.
Else, yeah.
So that's the first thing. The next one is like, you have to reject the lie. So if you can identify, here's the lie that I've been taught my entire life. So I'll give you an example. For me, I have been taught my entire life that I'm not good enough. We get into where it came from. It doesn't really matter. That's a conversation for a different time and a deeper podcast episode. But the lie that I've realized is that I have been taught you're not good enough.
And for people to find this, they pray on it, journal on it, meditate on it, like...
Yeah, I would pray on it. I think that's like one of the biggest things is just asking God, like, well, first you have to be truthful. Like, what are all your fears, right? So you have to say, and this is Jamie Winship's work. So I'm like plagiarizing a little bit of it, but whatever. Most people know who he is and he's amazing. And it's going to change more people's lives. So Jamie Winship is the one who came up with this initial concept. I'm paraphrasing it into my own words. So Jamie would say, first thing you have to do is be honest about who you think you truly are. So I'm not good enough. I'm worthless. I suck. I like whatever the negative stuff is, right? And then he would even say, like, write down all your fears. So what's everything that you're worried about? I'm worried that I'm not going to be successful. I'm worried that my daughter's going to think I'm a loser, that, you know, my team's going to leave me, like whatever the lie is, right? So once you write down all the fears, then you just give it up to God and say, okay, God, what do you say about me? And then for me, the word that came through is this one word is like, you're amazing. That's it. And so I realized in that moment, after sitting with it for a while, is that if God looks at me as amazing, then what would the enemy try to do? Try to convince me that I'm not amazing and that I'm not good enough and that I don't have anything to offer to the world and that my ideas are stupid and I shouldn't share them and whatever. And he's going to try and convince me of that of every place, right? So we recognize the lie. Now I can step into a place where I can reject the lie by saying, here's what's truth. And so that's the truth, is like, you're amazing. Well, if you're amazing, then now you have a responsibility to do things differently, right? But it starts with, like I said, I've said this a couple times in the episode, it starts with that awareness,
right,
which is so key. Then what I would argue is you have to look at where you're out of alignment on what that truth is. So for me, it just falls into core values is the most simple way to think about it, is like, if you can recognize a lie, you can reject the lie and answer what is true. Now you got to look at in your life, where are you out of alignment with that truth that you now know about yourself and your true identity? For us, it would be core values, right?
Yeah.
So example, one of our core values is vitality. The body is self-healing, self-regulating, self-maintaining.
Yes.
Except for back in the day, even when I was so vitalistic in some ways and I was obsessed with chiropractic, I still had a tendency to be addicted, trying to numb myself, right?
Yes.
So how could somebody who believes that the body's self-healing, self-regulating, self-maintaining put drugs in their system to like alter their state and numb themselves?
Right.
Well, that was out of alignment, right? Because I didn't know, I couldn't identify what the truth was
You
yet,
weren't aware of
right?
that,
I wasn't
yeah.
aware of the truth. So I hadn't recognized the lie. I hadn't seen what the truth was. So now that I know the truth, I can be like, okay, where am I out of alignment? Luckily, I can look back in retrospect, and that's how this framework came to be, right?
Yeah.
Next one is you literally have to renew your mind. So the Bible talks about this, but like, what's the story that you now must tell yourself? So that would be, I am worthy. I am enough. I do have cool ideas to share. Nobody's going to do it just like me, and that's okay. Whatever the story is, right? So that's number 4. And then the last one is, I think, looking at like, what's your world class at? And arguably, what you are world class at are the very things that people told you made you a problem when you were younger. So I'll give an example of this. I just met a new friend who I will have on this show very, very soon, probably next month. And one of the things he talked about is, he said, in school, they told me I was slow because it took me a long time to process ideas. So what was a problem is actually his superpower, because what he's really good at is taking a complex idea and boiling it down into like 3 to 5 points and making like a framework out of it that you could actually use and live from. And he does this with everything that he does. So I'm talking to him and I'm like, dude, you're literally a genius. And he's like, that's funny that you say that because my entire life I've been told that I'm dumb and that I'm slow. And so the same thing, like we have a new client who's a girl who just started with us, and her school is like, she's young, right? She's just a little bit older than Coco.
Right.
Her school has told her that because she's so observant and detail oriented, that she's a problem, that this is a bad thing, and that she has a disability. And I'm looking at this kiddo and I'm hearing her speak about the world and the things that she recognizes and the comparisons and the places where she notices like, oh, this is the same as that is the same as that. She has a way of thinking that I've never seen in a kid her age before.
Wow.
So she's being told by the school system that she's a problem. But I see it and I'm like, dude, that is your superpower. You better never let it go. And like sitting with mom and telling her that, like I'm in tears thinking about it.
So how can you foster that for her, for example?
It's just to encourage her that like, listen, the way you think about the world is so unique and don't ever let anybody take it away from you.
Yeah.
The same with Coco.
Yeah.
Coco, we share all the time, is like, Coco, you're so creative. You're so generous. You are so kind.
She's
Just
such a loving.
continue to love people no
Mm-hmm.
matter what anybody else tells you to do. And it's, what are we doing? We're fostering the thing, or at least in my opinion, we're fostering the things that I see in her that are her superpowers.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question. So you gave the framework for like us as adults, right? So how can us as like parents or us as other providers foster this in our children and in our clients or patients, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for it's the same framework, right? So first, but you got to recognize, like, if someone's coming in and they're like, my kid's a problem, it might be, this is why I tell people when I sit with them and I sit with parents on the first visit and I say, hey, listen, you know, all their symptoms are normal. This is how God created our bodies in an abnormal amount of stress.
Right.
So we're already trying to break this framework and this idea that like your kid's broken or there's a problem with them. It's like, no, they're actually perfect, right? Nadej's sore throat is her body's perfect design to heal itself in time of too much stress or when there's too much bacteria in the system or whatever it is. The ear infection is your body doing the best that it can to try and fight off the thing that it doesn't want there in the first place. It's not because we're broken. It's because we were designed so intelligently.
Right.
So empowering the like that you're not broken mentality, I think is the first thing, right? Looking at the places where you see your kid as a problem. Oh my gosh, they're so defiant, or they always have a different way of thinking. Or like we have a friend right now and their kiddo is like a master. And we were talking about this, and one of the other moms is like, they are literally a master at like getting people to do what they want for them. Always.
That's so true. Yeah.
And so I don't want to share who it is, but it's like that. A lot of times parents or people would be like, no, you can't do it that way. That is so bad. You're being manipulative, whatever, but it's going to be your superpower. She's probably going to be a salesperson one day and she's going to crush it and like
She's
change a
gonna
whole bunch
lead.
of people's
Yeah.
lives for whatever she's selling.
For sure.
And I think it's so special, but it's like, if we don't foster it, we have to be aware so that we can foster it. So that would be the thing, because then if we're aware of what the superpower actually is and what the lie is and what world tried to tell us is a lie, then we can go through the same process. We just do it with our kids. And then that allows us to have a different standard for how we live in our household.
And you can even do that for like clients and patients.
Yeah,
that
for
you,
your
like,
patients.
lead.
This isn't a conversation about like, it's not to hate on the school system. It's to say like, there's a better, if you want to be a leader, like if you have a practice and you're going to lead people because people are going to show up in your practice. And if you have one client, then you're leading somebody. If you have one team member, you're leading somebody. If you have a family, you're leading somebody. This is a leadership principle. It's that calling people higher requires you to understand like all the places where stuff is misfounded, misguided, etc. And as we elevate, what did I say in the beginning and what I'm so passionate about? Everybody has the same potential to be successful, but we get it shunted out of us by the time we're in 5th grade or whatever it is. And I'm here to foster it in people. And I want to do it with my team. I want to do it with my wife. I want to do it with my daughter. I want to do it with the person at the grocery store. I want to do it with the kid who's like working his butt off at the restaurant. And I'm like, dude, you should probably own this place one day because I'm pretty sure you care about this work that you're doing more than any other kid your age I've ever seen.
We've done that at Burger Lounge.
We've done it. Yeah. So many times, so many places, but it's like that requires a new level of standard in your life to be like, I reject those lies. We're going to implant something new. We're going to set core values. We're going to live in congruency with those. And then we're going to operate from that place and only from that place.
Yeah.
And we're going to teach it to somebody else. And we're going to realize like this is what we're world class at, and we're going to go all in on it.
Cool.
Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm. Beautiful. All right. So you're not succeeding because you're not good enough. You're not succeeding because you haven't mastered this idea of realizing where you're stuck. And it just requires a new level of awareness. And so sitting with this framework, that's why I think it's so important, is the 5-part framework. Just to recap, is first, you got to recognize what the lie is. 2, you got to realize, okay, what's true and reject that lie. 3, you got to come with your core values and realize where you're out of alignment. 4 is beginning to step into the new truth. So asking the question of what's the story you have to tell yourself about once you have your true new identity. You got to tell yourself a story to maintain it, or somebody else is going to try and come and attack it again. And then lastly, the 5th step of it is like, what's your superpower, right? Like, and then share it with the world. I think that's the part that people don't do is like, go like tell people and do the thing that you feel called to do, because your life will change if you do it. Your life will literally change if you do it. Anything else before we wrap up? No? So hidden curriculum, it's a real thing. It exists. It exists in your home. It exists in schools. It exists all over the place. I would encourage you to just start to become aware. Awareness is the first key. It will absolutely change your life. If you want the identity playbook that I shared with you in this episode, DM me on Instagram at Dr. Daniel Kimbley, or DM me is going to be the best way, at Dr. Daniel Kimbley on Instagram. You can DM me identity and I will send it right over to you. We love you and appreciate you so much, fam.
Yeah. If you liked this episode, be sure to share it, subscribe, write a review, make a comment. More people need to hear about this.
We love you guys. Peace.